Joseph's story is a true beacon of hope in which we find a powerful message of faith and destiny mapped out by God Himself. Joseph, Jacob's beloved son, teaches us about divine faithfulness. Even in the midst of great trials, God's presence guided him. His life is an inspiration for us to trust in the divine plan. As difficult as it may seem, Joseph was a different young man, someone special. He carried with him the promise of a great future. God spoke to him through dreams, revealing a unique destiny. But this promise, Joseph's life shows us that the path of faith is not always easy. Like a bumpy road we will face in trials, like a muleteer on a rainy day. But just like Joseph, we can find strength and direction in the certainty of God's presence. If we keep our faith unshakable, like a Pau Brazil tree, we will see God's hand at work in our lives. It was evident that Jacob preferred Joseph. He presented Joseph with a special. Joseph's prophetic dreams only increased their envy and hatred. Envy corrupted them, leading them to plot against their own brother. Joseph's story warns us about the danger of envy. We must fight it with love and humility, seeking joy in the success of others. In an act of extreme cruelty, Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery as if he were some kind of object. From his family and everything he knew, like a bird taken from its nest, the pain of betrayal was immense, like a tightness in his chest. But Joseph didn't let himself be overwhelmed. Even in a foreign land, he clung to his faith. Like a crab clings to its shell in Egypt, Joseph faced the humiliation of slavery. He served in the house of Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh. Despite the difficulties, Joseph remained upright and hard-working, characteristics that did not go unnoticed. Like a diamond in the midst of rough stones, the story of Joseph shows us that faith does not exempt us from life's difficulties. Just as an umbrella doesn't stop the rain, but faith gives us the strength to face adversity with courage and dignity. Like a warrior facing battle, Joseph didn't let his situation define him, but kept his hope burning like the Olympic flame that never goes out. Joseph's life changed when he was falsely accused and imprisoned like a bird with its wings clipped. But even in prison, God's light shone on him. Joseph had the gift of interpreting dreams, which caught the attention of Pharaoh's cupbearer, the cupbearer. Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams foreshadowed times of plenty and famine. God uses unlikely situations to fulfill his plans. Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams was wise and precise, like a map that guides the traveler. He recommended that Egypt prepare for the difficult times ahead, like an ant that stores food for the winter. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh appointed him governor of Egypt, like someone who hands over the key to the city to an honored guest. Joseph, at just 30 years old, became the second most powerful man in Egypt. Like a soccer player who becomes a national idol, he led the country with wisdom and justice. Guided by the hand of God, like a conductor who leads his orchestra, Joseph stored grain during the years of plenty, saving Egypt from famine. Like a cautious farmer who guards against drought, Joseph's story shows us that God raises up those who are humble and faithful. Like a boat sailing with the wind in its favor, Joseph did not allow himself to be corrupted by power, but used his position to serve God and his neighbor. Joseph did not allow himself to be corrupted by power, but used his position to serve God and his neighbor. Like a river that carries water to the crops, the famine predicted by Joseph struck the world, including the land of Canaan, where his brothers lived. Like a frost that covers the crops in search of food, Joseph's brothers traveled to Egypt without knowing that the governor who would receive them was the brother they had betrayed. Like someone who enters a house and doesn't recognize their own brother. The reunion with his brothers, it was a moment of great emotion for Joseph, like meeting a childhood friend again. Joseph, moved by compassion, decided to test his brothers to see if their hearts had changed. Like someone who tests honey to see if it is pure. Joseph's story shows us that time and trials can transform hearts like time transforms unripe fruit into ripe. Joseph could have taken revenge on his brothers, but he chose the path of forgiveness, like someone who erases a drawing in the sand on the beach after testing his brothers and seeing the repentance in their hearts. Repentance in their hearts, Joseph revealed himself like the sun that rises from behind the clouds. The meeting was as exciting as the World Cup final. Joseph forgave his brothers, recognizing that God had used the situation for good. Like a player who recognizes his opponent's play, Joseph's attitude teaches us about the strength of forgiveness. Forgiving is not a sign of weakness, but of greatness. Like the strength of a giant, It is freeing oneself from the weight of the past and opening one's heart to reconciliation, like someone who opens a window for the sun to come in. Joseph invited his family to live in Egypt, where they prospered under his protection. Like a tree that flourishes in fertile soil, he recognized that all things work together for good for those who love God, like the pieces of a puzzle that fit together. Joseph's story teaches us that forgiveness is the key to healing and restoration. Like a tight embrace that comforts the soul, Joseph's story shows us how God works in mysterious ways, like a craftsman sculpting a work of art. What Joseph's brothers planned for evil, God turned it into a blessing. Like someone who turns lemon into lemonade. Through hardship, Joseph became an instrument of salvation, not only for his family, but for the entire nation of Egypt. Like a drop of water that turns into rain, Joseph's life is a testimony to the power of faith and the importance of trusting in God's plan, even when we don't understand what is happening. Like a navigator who trusts the compass, God has a purpose for each of us, and he is in control of all things. Like a conductor who conducts, Joseph could have rebelled against God, but he chose to trust. He clung to God's promise even when all seemed lost. Like a sailor who clings to a buoy on the high seas, and in the end he saw God's faithfulness. Like the sunrise after a long night, Joseph's story teaches us about faith, perseverance, forgiveness, and God's sovereignty. Joseph didn't let himself be overwhelmed by difficulties, but clung to his faith. He teaches us to forgive and trust that God is in control. Joseph teaches us to use difficulties as opportunities for growth. He chose a path of forgiveness and compassion. Joseph's example inspires us to live with faith, hope, and love. Joseph's story continues to inspire us centuries later as a classic of literature that never grows old. It reminds us that God is always present, even in the most difficult times. Joseph became a symbol of faith, resilience, and forgiveness. His life teaches us that we can overcome any obstacle if we keep our faith. May we follow Joseph's example by living with is a story about God's faithfulness and the transforming power of faith.